All right, all you Yinzers, welcome to another episode of the Mad Chad and Eddie Show on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. I'm your host, Eddie Provident. With me, as always, is my main man, Mad Chad Nolan. Chad, before we get into anything, man, I'm going to get what's going to tick everybody off out now. And then
usually that's my job.
Yeah, right. Normally you're Mad Chad. You're the one that gets everyone going.
Yeah,
Today I think it's going to be
me. Mad Eddie. Okay.
All right. So here's where I'm at with this. All right. Steelers lost 26-17 to the Las Vegas Raiders. I almost said Oakland. I got it right though. Las Vegas Raiders. First off, I want to give a shout out to Derek Carr because he played a hell of a football game. He looked good. Now the Steelers defense was banged up. You know, that's fine. It's whatever. You have games. I'm honestly not that upset over the loss. Like, you lose games, you get out coached, you get outplayed. It's the NFL. One team has gone through an entire season without losing a football game. Here's my issue, though. The Steelers brought in Najee Harris to be the running back that got them out of number 32 in the league in running and rushing. Okay. And everything that I am going to say has nothing to do with Najee Harris, because I think Najee Harris is a great young man. I think Najee Harris is a star. I think he's going to be one of the top running backs in the NFL. I still think he's got an opportunity to be Rookie of the Year, Offensive Rookie of the Year. I think that everything about Najee Harris is everything that you want in a star athlete that's going to be the face of a franchise, or that's going to be somebody that you're going to eventually pay a lot of money to be that big time name for your franchise. This has nothing to do with Najee Harris. But the Steelers should have drafted an offensive lineman in the first round. Okay, listen, I'm looking right at the camera. I'm telling everybody in Steeler Nation, the Steelers should have drafted an offensive lineman, particularly a tackle, in the first round, because this offensive line is a word that I can't say on this podcast network because we try to keep things clean. And I'm a pastor. But dude, they're terrible. Okay, look, they can't run block if their lives depended on it. They can't pass block if their lives depended on it. They don't even pick Ben Roethlisberger up when they let him get sacked. This offensive line is crap. And then you get Trey Turner. I don't care what someone does. You don't care if they spat on you first. You don't spit on another guy. You get thrown out of the game. You're our only really good offensive lineman. Maybe Kevin Dotson's in there, but I don't even know about him anymore right now. And you get yourself thrown out of the game that you could win if you're healthy. And if you don't believe me that this offensive line is objectively terrible, all you have to do is look at Mike Tomlin's decision on 4th and short with 8-9 minutes left in the game, and you're down by 2 scores. What does Mike Tomlin go and do? He punts the ball on 4th and short from his own 35 late in the fourth quarter. If that's any other offensive line, I think Mike Tomlin runs the football there. He's got Najee Harris in the backfield. He's got a first-round pick. You would run the football. The problem is he's got more trust in a broken-down, injured defense than he has in his offensive line. And I can't blame him for that.
Well, I think you can partially, because I do believe that Tomlin does have some say in regards to drafting, and in regards to, him and Colbert obviously talk about, hey, where do we need improvements at? And we've had this conversation. It was 100% negligent for them to come into this season saying, Chuks Okafor, Zach Banner, we're gravy at tackle.
Unreal, man. Unreal. We're
gravy. And I heard the perfect analogy, and I can't even remember. I would give credit, but I can't remember where exactly I heard it. It was on one of the sports shows. But the problem I think they have is, I think Ben and the Steelers overestimate what Ben is capable of doing at this point. Yes. I don't think Ben is washed. That throw to Deontay Johnson, 2015 Peyton Manning, noodle arm Peyton Manning, was not making those throws. But he is not an elite top carrying an offense quarterback anymore. He's a middle of the pack quarterback that you would want to just manage, game manage, don't throw.
He can make it. The way Dale and I talked about it on Steelers Today last week is that he can make a throw when you need him to make a throw.
Yes,
Okay,
but he's
his
not gonna
arm is
carry
fine.
the offense.
His arm is fine. His arm is not like what everyone was making it out to be. But to think that Ben Roethlisberger is going to show the mobility that he showed in the preseason when he ran around and scrambled and tried to threw a pass to Ebron that he dropped, that's not what we're going to see from Ben Roethlisberger game in and game out. The old days of Ben Roethlisberger
He
are
physically
over.
can't.
He physically cannot.
And I feel bad because I think you can see him. Again, like the one play that everybody pointed out where he should have just checked it down to Najee, but he was I'm Big Ben and I'm scrambling and I'm gonna nope, he got caught from behind, sack.
Yeah,
and you can see his mind go, wait a minute. I used to be able to get out of these things. I can't do that anymore.
And Chad, that's that's the thing. Like we're talking to Steve Mears later today, and we're gonna be talking to him about watching the careers story of the stars on your teams that you love, and we're on the back end of these stories with Ben Roethlisberger and Sid Crosby and Geno, Malkin and Chris Letang and all these guys that we've loved for pretty much our entire adult lives. But the thing is, Chad, this isn't gloom and doom for me yet. It's one game. You lose, like I said, I opened it up with you lose games in the NFL. That's part of being in the NFL. You don't go undefeated very often. Like I said, it's happened one time. My problem is they now are getting themselves to a point where this offensive line, who has two rookies on it right now, and guys that have never played with each other, they have to gel, and they have to gel very quickly. And they're playing Cincinnati, which normally would be a cupcake team, but they actually look pretty decent.
And they beat them last year.
Yeah, and they beat us last year. Yeah, they beat the Steelers last year. Yeah.
So it's not
and then you've got Green Bay after that, who
at Green Bay,
who they're not the best defensive team, but you're going to have to put up a lot of points on offense to keep up with Aaron Rodgers and Aaron Jones and Devontae Adams. Like they've got a lot of weapons.
Yeah.
And so this offensive line has to figure it out quick. And I don't know that they can. I hope that they can, but right now what we've seen in 2 games has not been good.
Here's the analogy that I have. So, because I think Najee Harris, I still think he's going to be a top 10 overall running back.
None of this has any bearing on my opinion.
And I think Freiermuth is going to be a long-time starting tight end. Yes. I don't think he's going to be like Kelsey, but I think he'll be Heath Miller. I know those Heath Miller comparisons are so tired, but I think that really is a good comparison about where he's going to be at. The problem is those are nice toys. Those are nice toys to have, but you don't have any batteries. It's like someone.
That's a great way of putting it. That's a great way of putting it.
Here's a PlayStation 5. By the way, you have no games and no controller, but you have a PlayStation 5. It's like, oh, that's great. It's so shiny, but I can't use them effectively because the essential thing that I need to be able to be successful as a quarterback is not there. And that might be on Ben because maybe Ben's saying, I'll be fine. The young offensive line, or maybe Tomlin was saying, no, we love Chooks. And so there is a fault somewhere along the line. Nobody stepped in and said, you know what? Yeah, Najee and Freiermuth and Chase and Juju and Deontay and Ben, that sounds great. But if we can't block adequately, none of that matters.
Yeah, and I think the thing is you referenced Ben again. I think that, and I hope that this isn't the case in the franchise, like within the organization, and I don't get the sense that it is, but I think for fans, all right, I'm speaking to fans right now. We look at a guy like Ben Roethlisberger and we see his career and what he's done. And I think that there's a part of us, and I'm including myself in this, okay? I'm not saying like, oh, look at all you guys. I am guilty of this as much as anybody. We look at Ben and we think, well, he's never going to get old. He's going to keep doing what Ben does because he's Ben Roethlisberger, and that's just how it is. Mm-hmm. And then we compare him we compare him to Tom Brady because Tom Brady, for whatever reason, just doesn't get old. He doesn't stop being good. And that's not fair. Ben is 39 years old, and we're seeing the twilight of his career, and he's just not what he used to be. And that's not me knocking on Ben. That's not me saying that, like you said, that Ben's washed. That's me looking at it realistically and saying, if you're going to succeed with Ben at 39, you have to fundamentally build the team in a different way than you would with Ben at 28 or 27. And we're actually going to talk to Steve Mears about this on the hockey side when we come back from this break, because we're going to talk to him about Sid Crosby and Geno Malkin and Chris Letang and Mario Lemieux and Jaromir Jagr and all these guys that on the hockey side we've witnessed the start, middle, end of their careers. And, what does that mean? And, from somebody who gets to see the team every single day, how does that play out?
There are some similarities, which is weird because, again, I think like right now the Penguins are set up and they're kind of forced from the salary cap as well, where their team is still built on Crosby and Malkin elevating everybody else and carrying the team because they're not as deep and they're not going to be physically capable of doing that anymore. And it's the same thing with the Steelers, where this team is built on Ben Roethlisberger carrying the offense, and he's not physically able to do that anymore. It's just, it's a mixture of bad asset management as far as evaluating where those skill sets are and what you have available. And also it's just, that's life. Father Time's undefeated, and it was going to happen eventually.
Yep. So what we'll do, we're going to take a quick break here, and then when we come back, we'll have Steve Mears with us of the Penguins broadcasting team, and we'll hang out with him, and we'll talk some Penguins hockey. So this is the Mad Chad and Eddie Show on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. We'll be right back after this. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Mad Chad and Eddie Show on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. You will see that we have a guest with us. He is a returning guest for Chad and I, but new to the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. You probably know his voice better than you know his face, but everybody knows Steve Mears if you're a Penguins hockey fan. Steve, thanks for coming back on, man. It's good to see you again.
Great talking with you guys. It's nice to be this close to hockey season and at least training camp, so I'm ready to go.
Yes.
So, Eddie, what are you excited? I mean, like I talked to DK today, and he was there for the scrimmage today, or up at camp in Cranberry, and he said that it was just nice to be able to talk to players. He got a couple of one-on-ones, and seemed like there was some access again. What's it like to be around the team with maybe not completely back to normal, but just kind of getting back to some kind of semblance of normal?
Yeah, I was there for the first time today. I wanted to go see the scrimmage with the prospects and the rookies, and it was so fun just to be back at the rink. I mean, we just missed that environment, and we had access to watch practice, but just to be down and to see some friendly faces. And it does become a family from everybody, the fellow media members, the Penguin staff, their outstanding PR staff that they have, the other broadcasters, and even the training staff. And once we get into the main training camp, we can get to see the players again, which is something we haven't done for a good year and a half now. So just to be back at the rink is always a privilege, and just to be getting somewhere close to where we were 2 years ago and back to some semblance of normalcy. Just to be standing in a media scrum today. We were with Scott Young, and we were able to ask questions, and it was just nice to be able to have that environment again and not be at a distance and not be exclusively on Zoom. So it was just nice to be at the rink and to see so many friendly faces again.
For sure, man.
And speaking of like normalcy, so they always ask players, hey, what was your off season like? How do you stay in shape while being on vacation and stuff like that? And something that some of our listeners and myself were intrigued about with you coming on the show is, how do you approach not being involved in a season? Obviously, you're going to be spending time with like family and vacations, but is there anything that you try to do to not maybe like get into bad habits and then have to worry about them? Like how does a media person go about an off season, so to speak?
That's a great question. I never really asked other broadcasters what they do, but I'd be curious. I think I'd love to know what some other guys do just to stay sharp. I think everybody at least has their finger on the pulse of the team and the league and spends enough time watching NHL Network in the off season, reading articles, and just you want to make sure that you're not completely unplugged from the league itself and the different storylines. And there are a lot of things that go on in the off season. You got the draft, you got free agency. There are multiple transactions that happen for the Penguins and different bits of news that come out. So I'm always trying to stay up and stay in tune with what's going on there. From a broadcasting side, I might do a mock game and do it off my laptop. Just okay, back on the bike, just to get used to that flow. From a real broadcasting perspective, I just did the U.S. Open in New York, so obviously much different than hockey, but it is just kind of exercising those broadcasting muscles, being on the air, doing a completely different style of play-by-play.
For sure.
And I think that's all to the good. I think it's all just keeping you sharp, and it's challenging. And for me, I don't have the library of knowledge about tennis that I do for hockey in my head. So it's a real good exercise just to be somewhere where you're uncomfortable. I think we all need to be uncomfortable at times, and your body needs stressors because that's how you strengthen. It's like a muscle. You strengthen in a lot of different ways with those different exercises, whether it's physical or mental. So I thought now doing U.S. Open for 2 years, it was a good challenge to be in an uncomfortable setting where I'm basically like a rookie again. And I'm just trying to navigate, use my analysts because they're the expert, and just trying to figure out the best way to do a completely different sport that couldn't be more of a 180 from what hockey is.
Steve Mears, big tennis guy. So Steve, we wanted to talk to you today about kind of, just to give you a backstory. In the first segment, we talked about Ben Roethlisberger and kind of seeing, the end of an era for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And so we kind of figured it'd be a good idea to talk about that with you today with the Penguins. What was it like for you to see as a fan, like kind of the end of Mario Lemieux and watching that, and then looking forward to, whether we like to admit it or not, we would love to think that that Sid and Geno are going to live forever and Letang's going to, play forever. But, they're in their mid-30s now, and they're starting to get to the twilight of their careers, and kind of what we should expect. So, real quick, I guess we'll start with Lemieux, because that's the guy for me that there's one reason why I'm a hockey fan, and I know that's the typical Yinzer answer, but watching Mario Lemieux as a little kid is why I love hockey. And before we get into like our stories about it, what was it like for you to be such a big hockey fan and kind of come to the realization that, oh, this is it, he can't do what he used to do?
Yeah, that was I was the same way with Mario. That the only reason I'm into this sport and in this team and probably got into this profession. The profession, of course, Mike Lang was a big part of that, but it's all started with Mario. I mean, he put the team on the map, and he brought them to prominence, and that's what got a whole generation of sports fans into hockey and into the Penguins in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. So, his case is unique because he retires at the very top of his game. And I was at his last home game, what we thought was his last home game. And that's one of the most vivid memories and one of the most emotional moments.
Yeah, from Clement, I think it was. That game was crazy.
Yeah, well, it was on ESPN. Gary Thorne and Bill Clement were doing the game. Yep. Ironically, the goalie was Garth Snow, who had worked with the Islanders a few years later, and he beat him. But the roar of that, I'll never forget that. And I'll never, ever forget standing up, leaving after he had done the multiple curtain calls and named the first star and waving goodbye to the crowd, which it really was, so we thought. Getting up, and like, I'm 17 years old, and I turn around, there's a guy a fan who clearly had been crying. And he was just out there staring out the ice. And that's like, wow, that puts, when you're a kid or you're a high school student and you see that, like a grown man, and you just see the impact that an athlete can have and what he meant to the whole city, and he's going out on top. I mean, I'll never forget that moment. And then, of course, he comes back and retires again. And the thing that I try to pass along to younger fans with Crosby and Malkin and how lucky we've been is just don't take it for granted. And these guys, they do not play forever. You said it. They don't play forever. It's actually a very finite, very small amount. I think it was Ken Dryden in his great book, The Game. He said athletes live their lives in quarter time. They only play till, if they're lucky, into their mid-30s or late 30s. Jagr a little bit later, but it's a very small window that we get to watch these guys. And then eventually there's the decline and they retire. So you just have to appreciate it, especially here in Pittsburgh, because we've been so lucky. You have to appreciate what we're seeing. And you just, like, every time you go to a game, just appreciate, even if you go to the warm-up and just watch Crosby, go to Cranberry, watch him practice, Malkin practice, appreciate the skill and the power and the speed, because not every market is as fortunate as we've been, and it does not last forever. And there will be another generation, many generations, we know that, but this one's special, and we have to just soak it all in while we can.
Yeah, and Steve, I think to your point about Sid especially, I think his injury history, at least for me, kind of got me in that mindset of anytime that dude takes the ice, I appreciate it and I enjoy watching it, because I remember what it was like for that year and a half where it was basically a full season, spread out between 2 seasons, where we didn't know if he was going to come back. If you remember, there was talks of him retiring. We didn't know when there would be a return. We didn't know how bad the injury was. We didn't know if it was a concussion. It was, it ended up being the neck injury. But I just remember thinking, like, man, this dude is at the top of the game. He was on a 24-game point streak, was on pace for about 120, 130 points that season. Yeah. And it was just boom, just like that, drop of a hat, it was over. And so for me, at least with Sid, I think because of that, I've gotten to the point where I just enjoy watching exactly what you just said, man. Anytime I get to watch Sid play hockey, whether it's him practicing, if it's a video of him skating around up at Cranberry, anything I get to watch of Sid, I just enjoy it, because I know how finite that is with any athlete, but especially with him.
Yeah. And the Mario case is a perfect example of, you don't know what you got till it's gone. And there he was. And remember, when he retired in 97, there was no chance he would ever come back. I mean, there was like, he was so happy in retirement, and it was like, okay, well, he went off into the sunset. He scored a goal in his last shift at the Igloo, and that was it. And there was never any talk that he would make a comeback. So when that news broke, I mean, it was just so stunning, and we were so lucky. So I think just living through that, I know I appreciated every shift he took from 2000 on in those final few years, because it was like a bonus. I mean, he had contributed so much to the league and to the team and to the city, and then to get a few more years, and he played very well when he was healthy, especially in 2001. So I think that's a perfect example. You don't know what you got till it's gone. Mario comes back, and you just, I think I've always used that as the example of just appreciating what we have there. And of course, his health, same thing, where there were many times where you didn't know if he was going to play again, if he was going to make one of his great comebacks. But Crosby, health story, as you said, the same thing. Jagr too. So you just have to appreciate every single opportunity to watch these guys. And I always look at the other teams. The Flyers, for example, they've never had a scoring champion. We've had 15 in 30 years at one point. I mean, it's just like we're so unbelievably spoiled here. That and then, like, the Rangers haven't had one in decades. The Leafs, I mean, just to have one, franchises would kill to have one of these guys, and we've had 4, if not more, here in Pittsburgh.
Well, I think that's what's making the last couple of years or the end of the Crosby and Malkin era going to be. I think Ron Hextall and the ownership are going to have a really interesting case on their hand, because I've always been of the opinion that Crosby and Malkin have earned the right to go out on their own terms within reason. I'm going to play until I'm 40, and then I'll take the wave. But Ron Hextall, at the same time, it is a business. So if Evgeni Malkin's skills rapidly deteriorate, or Sidney Crosby can no longer do the things that Sidney Crosby is used to being able to do physically, how does Ron Hextall and ownership approach giving those guys the proper send-off they feel that they've earned to show them the love and support, but also maintaining a successful franchise in the salary cap era? I wonder how that approach is going to come, and what your thoughts on, what they can do and what they should do.
Yeah, it is tricky, because you have the sentimentality and you have the respect for what they've done in the past. But at the same time, if you're a general manager, you've got to run this business like a business, and it's got to be done properly, and especially in a salary cap era. So there have been a lot of teams, we can go down, especially the teams that have won recently, that have made a lot of mistakes in being a little too loyal to some of those players who gave them a lot of success. LA Kings are the first one to come to mind. I mean, gave some ridiculous contracts out after, and a lot of it was well-deserved. I mean, they gave Mike Richards a big deal, and Dustin Brown got a big contract. And some of the guys, for what they accomplished there in Los Angeles, they deserved it, winning 2 cups and had like a little miniature dynasty, 2 cups in 3 years and some conference finals. And so they earned a lot of that. And I know their general manager, Dean Lombardi, wanted to reward that and as a thank you and hoping to keep it going. But they were probably a little too loyal to some of those guys. Now in Pittsburgh, it's a little different because you've got a big-time franchise icon like a Crosby and a Malkin. I think they're on a different class than a Mike Richards or a Dustin Brown. So
I think that's safe to say.
Not just skill-wise, but just what they meant to the franchise. And those players for the Penguins, of course, their jerseys will be in the rafters one day. So you have to keep it all in mind, and you just it's so tricky in a salary cap world, and some of it is going to fall on the players too. It's going to be up to them to take the hometown discount, I think, if they want to remain here. And if they don't, they can't expect to get paid $10 million while the Penguins are trying to retool and maintain their status as a perennial contender. So that's all the things that are going to have to be weighed by Ron Hextall. It's a tough position. You don't want to just kind of be mediocre. We know that's the worst place you could be because you're not getting the draft choices. There are a lot of examples. The Rangers did it for years where they just were hovering in the middle. And then eventually they finally figured it out. And like, oh, if we just break it all down, start from scratch, we can kind of build back up. And now look at them. The future's pretty bright, even if they don't make the playoffs this year. So the worst places to be in the NHL, the worst place is that
treading water
level. Yeah, that's where you don't want to be. But you also have to factor in selling tickets, and you have to factor in doing the right thing and treating these legends the way that they deserve to be treated going out. But only to an extent where you just don't want to make any gaffes, because the Penguins and in this salary cap era, you cannot have that albatross contract that's just going to weigh you down. So it's really going to cost you down the road. You have to be smart with the deals that you hand out.
Yeah, and like you said, with the salary cap, and especially because of the pandemic, we don't know what the salary cap's going to do. So that makes that all the more important.
Hopefully the new TV rights help it out.
For sure. Steve, let's take a quick break because rather than reminiscing on old or previous stars or fading stars, I want to talk to you about the upcoming generation of the NHL and get your thoughts on a couple of things that are going on with some of the younger guys in the league. So this is the Mad Chad and Eddie Show on DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. We will be right back after this. All right, welcome back to the Mad Chad and Eddie Show on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. I'm your host, Eddie Provident. With me is Mad Chad Nolan and our main man, Steve Mears, from the Pittsburgh Penguins broadcasting team. Yes. Steve, I was listening to the radio the other day, and I was listening to a podcast the other day, Elliot Friedman and then on 31 Thoughts, and they were talking about Connor McDavid. And I guess there's some comments that McDavid had just recently. And I think this is a really good topic for Penguins fans as well, because of I think things that we've seen with Sid and with Lemieux especially. He was talking about officiating, and especially officiating in the playoffs. Connor McDavid went 8 games. His last 8 playoff games, he has not drawn a single penalty. And we all know that the NHL changes when you get into the playoffs. And I don't think that that's inherently a bad thing for a sport to change a little bit when you get into the playoffs. But the NHL, it basically becomes almost a different sport. You talk about teams like, the Montreal Canadiens, who people always say, well, if they make the playoffs, they're going to be tough because they play a different brand of hockey. But McDavid basically said, just call the rule book. And my question to you is, you get to see these guys every single night. You get to see them on their good days, on their bad days. And that goes for the refs too. What does the NHL need to do to get guys like Connor McDavid and Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner and all of these young, bright stars, Pedersen and all these guys. How do they, especially with the new TV deal that Chad alluded to right before the break, how do we get these guys in the spotlight and how do we get their talent on display rather than kind of like the big muckers and grinders?
Yeah, there's a couple of different facets to that. First of all, about the penalties, I agree with Connor that it should not be a separate rule book in the playoffs, at least not to the extent that it's become over the last couple of years. I did the final in Boston and St. Louis 2 years ago, and the St. Louis Blues, they benefited from the lack of calls, and they were able to get through a couple of rounds, and some coaches I know weren't too pleased about it. I know there were instances where Cam Neely and the Bruins weren't happy about it. So they got away with a lot of stuff, and they're a big, heavy team, and that's why we've seen heavier teams win here recently. So I don't agree with just having a completely different rule book once the playoffs begin. I understand. You hear it from the players themselves. A lot of it is let the boys play. All we want is consistency. You don't want the refs to decide it. You don't want like the classic, they call it ticky-tack penalty in double overtime. I get all that, but it's too much of a disparity from October on the start of the year to what is allowed in the third round of the playoffs. It is almost like a completely different game, and it benefits a lot of different teams and skill levels. And I think as a league, we should be trying to boost the skilled players, and not even boost, just let them do their thing. I mean, it's not even like giving them favoritism. It's just like let them be on display with their full force of talents. So, I definitely see that. All you have to do is look at the math and look at the penalties, the power play chances from October, always at the beginning of the season. Standards very high, and they call everything. And teams have 6, 7, 8 power play chances. And then the playoffs, you're in a game 7, you're lucky to have 1. So I don't think that that's the way it should be. It's an age-old discussion, though. That's been going on a long time. It's nothing new. I do wish they would just call it consistently throughout the season, and the players will adjust, but it's got to be consistent all the way through. And then as far as the other facet is just the marketing, getting these guys out there. I do think the TV deal is going to help. Social media helps. It's a sport where the athletes are notoriously humble and very quiet and aren't going to make a big story out of themselves. They're not going to seek out the spotlight. So there are players like Connor McDavid who are just naturally shy and quiet, more quiet. But I think the TV deal is going to help already. I'm seeing some great things from both ESPN and TNT. And I just think highlighting this new generation, this generation is incredible. McDavid, McKinnon, Austin Matthews, Jack Eichel, Marner. And there are other great players who are just breaking through, Cole Caulfield and Trevor Zegras, and the next group that's coming up with Jack Hughes and his 2 brothers. So there's a whole other wave of talent, especially American talent, that's coming up into the league, and we have to celebrate that. So it's going to be up to those TV networks and up to the league itself to get those faces out there and to get it also into more mainstream sports programming. There are these some are on ESPN, others are on other cable channels, and these sports talk shows where there's no chance of them mentioning hockey. Right. And that's a problem. Whether, I don't know if it's Dan Patrick's show or Stephen A. Smith, that's something I think's got to change, where it can't just be when something terrible happens in hockey, that's when they discuss it. No, it's got to be talking about some of the great feats of those players that I mentioned. And I think that's another part where the game itself, the league, everybody, you've got to do a better job of getting a little bit more into that mainstream sports conversation.
I think it's always a case of the NHL. Dejan has a great tagline where he calls the NHL the best sport, the worst league, when it comes to being aware of what fans want. Because I think the NHL goes out of its way to cater to the hardcore fans a little bit too much, because I don't know if what their marketing people are seeing, but I can promise you, when you talk to casual fans, there is nothing more exciting than watching a team either try to score on a power play or kill a penalty. And when you go to the playoffs and you basically eliminate that aspect to the point where it's noticeable and changing the way guys play and changing the outcomes of games, I really don't know if they know or understand that it's turning off a lot of fans to watch that style of hockey.
Yeah, there's so many different facets of that as well. As far as the marketing, and there's like the on ice and then there's the off ice. So I was mentioning some of the off ice type things. The on ice, yeah, that goes back to calling the rule book the way it is, showcasing the talents of these great players. And I will give the league credit for some of the marketing initiatives that they have done, such as the outdoor game, which was a fantastic idea.
Definitely.
Some people think it's been watered down. There's too many of them, but the bottom line is it's a great event. The Winter Classic is right there. Talk about being on the sports mainstream discussion. The Winter Classic is there now on New Year's Day. And I think they've done a great job with all their big events that they've had, whether it's the outdoor games or the centennial celebration. So I give them credit for that. They've taken strides in diversity when, of course, there is a lot of work to be done in that front still, but they've done a good job of hiring the right people and getting at least some positive strides going. You Can Play. It was a fantastic initiative from Brian Burke and Patrick Burke. The league has been on board, so they were way ahead of the game on that, and just basically saying, if you can play, you can play, and that's how it should be with any sport. So we were talking about that on NHL Network 10 years ago. So I give the league a lot of credit for an initiative like that, and a few others that they've had. As far as the standard on the ice and calling the rule book, again, it's an age-old discussion. It goes back since I was a kid in Mario talking about it. So
Garage
I think
League.
there's a lot of room to improve with just trying to get it a little more uniform from October of the regular season to the postseason. That's all it is. Nothing too crazy as far as a super high skill team getting a big competitive advantage, but just making it a little bit closer to what we see in October, so that some of those players, the skilled players, can shine, and it's not just the classic clutch and grab hockey.
Yeah.
To your point, Steve, we want to see the skill players, right? Like that's what makes hockey exciting. The speed. No other game is played on a sheet of ice, and it makes it that much faster of a sport. And look at what the NFL did. How does the NFL capitalize on their success? They make the game more of an offensive game. They make the games more like higher scoring. They make them more entertaining from that standpoint. There's more things happening. There's a better chance for bigger plays.
And they placate to their talent.
I think that the NHL has to find a way to highlight the offensive side of the game. I mean, trust me, I love a good goalie battle as much as anyone else, but I'm a hardcore hockey fan. That whether you cater the game to me or whether you cater the game to somebody else, you're always going to have me. You're always going to have Chad. You're always going to have Steve. We're going to be there no matter what. We've got to figure out ways to get new people involved. And I think the higher scoring, faster paced hockey is going to draw the average fan or the new fan more than that, zone trap, lock it down defensively, 1-0, 2-1 kind of hockey game would.
Yeah. And to their credit, looking at a broader picture, the game has migrated to speed and skill over the last, say, 30 years. It's never been faster, for one thing. Never been faster. We've never seen
which makes your job more difficult.
Never seen a player like Connor McDavid ever with the skills that he do at full speed. Never seen anything like that. 3-on-3 overtime, the advent of that, and that's
so much fun, man.
Skill.
So much fun.
They've weeded out the fighters. I think everyone knows that that's a bygone era now. Sure, it still exists, but what we know about head injuries and so forth, and that's kind of been pushed out. The just fighters, the fighting by appointment, that's pretty much gone. So the broader trend is that the game is moving to a more speed and skill game. I think what we're talking about is more specifics, like in the playoffs, and just
the nuanced
stuff.
For sure.
A standard of officiating. And just not wanting to get it back to, say, the mid-'90s, the dead puck era. And I don't think anybody wants to see that, including the league. But I do like what I'm seeing, that for the most part, the general trend is a positive one, where we do see McDavid and Matthews and so forth, and they are the game breakers, and they're the ones that are out there, at least for the regular season. There's nothing better than watching some of these guys, Crosby and Malkin, of course, as well. But as I said, there's even a new crop of younger players that are coming up. And a player like Jack Hughes, how does he survive in the 90s? Like, how there's no way. Johnny Gaudreau.
No chance.
I mean, think about some of the these guys, they're like a buck 50
Cole Caulfield,
soaking wet.
Yeah.
How are you going in? How are you going in the corner with Darian Hatcher in 1995 or
Scott
Zdeno
Stevens?
Chara?
My goodness.
Scott Stevens, yeah.
You never see that, never at all. And these guys like Jack Hughes, he's able to dangle, he's able to just kind of slither his way out of a corner and make a play, and he doesn't have to worry about getting knocked into the 10th row by some guy who has no business being out there other than fighting and throwing his weight around. So that to me says that there is a nice trend in general toward the speed and the skill. And I think that's the most artful, and that's the best part of this game. I agree with you.
Hey, Steve, we thank you so much for being on the show. I know we're pressed for time, so we're going to wrap it up here soon. I did have a few questions and you can give short answers if you want. Some of our listeners were really excited about you coming on the show, so I picked out some of the best ones that I thought would be interesting. I'll give you two easy ones here. One is they wanted Matt wanted to know whenever there's a lull in the season, especially like coming up in the season where the Penguins might be without a lot of their star power with Crosby and Malkin, or maybe the game isn't as you have some eggs some nights where it's just the game's really, there's not really any great storylines.
Middle of February.
How do you approach that? And like, are you sensing that as you're watching the game? Like, oh, this game, I have to try to bring out a storyline because this game is a snooze fest. Do you sense that? Are you getting feedback from the producers? Are you what goes on in an event like that where even as me, I'm a hardcore hockey fan. I'm like, oh, it's 1-1 Florida, Pittsburgh in February, and I'm falling asleep.
Hey, 1-1 isn't too bad. I'm thinking and I'll remind you, I don't know why I'm going to say this, but the first Penguin TV game I did was a 10-1 loss in Chicago.
I was just talking with my buddy about that last night. Man. Stupid
Blackhawks goal song is forever seared in my brain.
Yeah, my God.
It's but it just reminds me that I have no control over the win, the loss, the stats, the score. We have as broadcasters, have no control over any of that. The best we can do is prepare for every scenario. You have to go into it preparing like it will be a 10-1 game, win or lose, because you have to have enough information to get out there and stories or whatever it might be. Hockey's a good sport in that it's not like baseball where you have a discussion and a lot of downtime. The action is always going to be going on, and you never know. You might still, even in a 10-1 game, you might see something you've never seen before. So there's always that type of possibility of having like a really one-sided game. But it is a long season, and we all know as fans, some nights the players bring it, and other nights they just don't have it at all. And the least we can do is just be prepared. I'm always appreciative just to be there. I get in for free. And hopefully we can go out there and Bob and I have a good time on the air and just have fun because we get along really well. But also, you can't be inauthentic. You can't be like screaming your head off when the Penguins
we got a real barn burner here, folks.
They score a goal to make it 5-1 with 30 seconds left. I mean, that's not really going to be authentic, and I think anyone's going to be able to see right through that. So you just have to tell it like it is. And during the course of the year, I think we have as much fun as anybody. We like to keep it loose and conversational. So I think that's a big part of just getting through some of those dog days of winter, because we all have them. There's no doubt with the way the season is, and the guys are playing 3 games in 4 nights, and this year it's a compressed schedule with the Olympics. Not every night is going to be a masterpiece or a classic. But with this team, though, we're lucky because on most nights it's really fun to watch.
Well, Steve, we'll wrap. I just want to get your final thoughts, because we'd be terrible hosts if we didn't get your thoughts on this before you walked away. 60 seconds, Mike Lang.
Not even nearly enough time. I mean,
no,
there's no way I could.
Speaking of an end of an era, and that's the perfect theme for the show too.
60 seconds. Yeah. You tie a bow around it nicely. That's well, I kind of gave my thoughts on Twitter. I think people can see that with what he's meant to me. I've said it on other interviews before. He's been such a great friend and mentor. And I just don't know how you thank someone who just inspired your whole career. He's the only reason I got into this business. How do you adequately thank that person who's had such a great influence in your life? And All I did was just send him a text that day because I knew his phone was blowing up, and I just said, thanks for the inspiration, thanks for everything, and congratulations on an amazing career, which is exactly what he had. There's just so many stories, so many little nuggets that he taught me over the years. Just like, for one, just take an extra split second to make sure, 71, not 72. Oh, it's Malkin, not Horn. Just take that one extra second just to make sure when you're announcing and when you're identifying players. He said, judge the big picture. When you have a mistake or maybe one little call is clunky, judge the big picture. You talk for 3 hours and like 90% of it was really good. And then I remember asking him one time, how many times did you walk away from the rink in 40 plus years and say, nailed it, perfect broadcast? And he said, I don't know, 40 years, maybe 10 times.
That's crazy.
10 times in 46 years, 10 times. But that's what made him great. He was the ultimate perfectionist. And he was as angry as anybody when there was even something that was slightly out of place or a little clunky, whatever it might have been. But that's what made him great, the ultimate perfectionist. And those calls I could listen to like it's a favorite song. Like if it was anything on my iPhone, a favorite song from any band that I like, I could listen over and over again to his calls because it was like he was singing to you. So I'm going to miss him. We're going to miss him around the rink. And but I know I can. He's just such a great resource. I know I can just reach out and give him a call. And if I ever have a question or something, he's been so gracious to help me out over the years. And I'm just very lucky that he took me under his wing when I first came back here to Pittsburgh, and has taught me so much. So I'm just going to try to apply that and do the best I can. But there's only one Mike Lang. There's never going to be any replacement or never anybody like him ever again.
Well, maybe you could reach out to him whenever they do the Sudden Death remake, and you can play that part that he played in that one. That'd be pretty cool. Hey, give me some acting lessons.
I know. He probably still gets the royalty checks. Is that what they are? He probably still gets like a 10-cent royalty check whenever that airs on channel 672 on the cable box and all the way down. He's done it all. And this, I think about it, like I mentioned that St. Louis Boston. That was a game 7 of the Stanley Cup final, which is rare. There have only been like 17 of them. And the first person I texted before doing that game was Mike Lang. Hey, he did it 2009 in Detroit. What's it like? Game 7 in the Cup final. You're calling that. What's the approach? And he said, treat it like any other game. That's right. Treat it like any other game.
That impresses
and he was right. That's exactly what you should do. Is that you prepare the same way and you just let the game tell the story. And obviously we're not the story. It's about the players. And that was the approach I had in Boston in 2019 when I was doing that game 7 that the Blues won. So that's another just a perfect example of just having him right there, a phone call away, and I can just ask him anything I want. And the same exact thing with saying goodbye to the legends, whether it's Roethlisberger, Mario, Sid, Jagr, Mike Lang, the same thing. You just appreciate it. The great thing is that with YouTube and all of the different resources, like his calls will live on forever. And I've said it many times, he will eternally be the voice of the Penguins. That will never change, and we'll always appreciate those 46 years and all those moments, because he was right there narrating, just as with a good soundtrack to a movie. He was the one who enhanced all those great moments in Penguin history.
Definitely.
Yeah. And, we gave a bunch of credit to Lemieux at the beginning of this interview for all three of us being hockey fans, but I think that it goes without saying that Mike Lang had a lot to do with that.
Definitely.
For all three of us as well, because I mean, that's the soundtrack. When I think of the cup wins, when I think of the playoff victories, when I think of the big goals, Mike Lang's voice is forever ingrained in those moments. And so, I think that's something special for every Penguins fan. And Steve, I have to say, and I promise you, I'm not saying this because you're on our show. I think that the way things are looking, you're probably going to be that for a new generation of Penguins fans. So, we're just honored to have you on. We're a big fan of everything you do, and excited to listen to you this hockey season, man. All right, well, for Steve Mears, for Mad Chad, for the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. Say that 3 times fast. I'm Eddie Provident. We appreciate you listening. Take care, and we will catch you next week.